My talk is on economic valuation methods with a focus on marine ecosystems. I should, right from the start, say that my own experience is primarily on bioeconomic analysis and valuation of fisheries. I do not have a great lot of experience in valuing the other parts of marine ecosystems. So what I present really is material which I have taken from other studies and from the literature. It's very difficult to be, so to say, the complete expert in that field, but there are references I have been using, and you can go to them and get a fuller view and understanding. But I think it will still be useful for you in a way to get an introduction to the topic, rather than a full coverage. So my presentation really is to give the framework to evaluate natural resources and ecosystems with a focus on marine resources. I review the methods to assess the value of ecosystems to human well-being. I will briefly talk about the system of integrated economic and environmental accounting as a means to keep a continuous record of the use and status of environmental resources. And then what are some of the critical evaluation issues? I think we already have covered some of these. Oh, that was too fast. So some basic consideration if you go to this issue of valuation from an economic angle. The use or misuse of ecosystems is governed by human behavior expressed in individual and societal choices. The idea of choices is fundamental in economics. It's really our preferences, what we wish to achieve, what we wish to consume, etc., which governs the use of resources and ultimately also their value. And choices are reflected in how we allocate scarce resources in response to our preferences or societal preferences. So we can either use a resource in this way or in that way. We can use it more intensely or less intensely, etc. Or we can decide we don't use it at all for human purposes, but just leave it, so to say, for nature as an intrinsic concept. Another fundamental issue is that there are different means through which coordination in the allocation of the use of scarce resources can take place, can be achieved. One of the fundamental systems is the price or the market mechanism. Another one is through regulatory systems. Yet another one is through certain incentives, policies. We can give subsidies, or we can tax, etc. And all these coordination mechanisms, they should be based on the best understanding, scientific analysis, and some form of democratic or at least participatory decision making. If there is no participatory decision making, no transparency, we can be sure we are not going to get it right. Now, what are some of the features? I just go down of natural resources. They are materials or other assets that are used and or transformed to produce benefits. natural resources have, or any resource has, they have three main characteristics. They provide utility, there is usually a limited availability, and so there is a potential for depletion or consumption. Well, some goods are actually depleted or destroyed when you consume them. Think of what we eat, or, well, there are many other things we literally destroy when we use them. From a human perspective, a natural resource is anything obtained from the environment to satisfy human needs and wants. And it's important for us to distinguish, I think that's obvious to probably all of us, renewable and non-renewable resources. Of course, if we talk about renewable resources, then we can actually decide on how intensely we use that, and at various levels of intensity they may still be in some way sustainable. Resources, we can literally draw them down, but what happens in actual fact is that we often make new discoveries, or we find some kind of substitutes, again in the nature, to replace what has been drained to some other resource which is more available. So we have concepts of competition, we have concepts of sustainability, conservation, and related to that, stewardship. These are all linked to natural resources, and they have already been discussed during our workshop. Important is that we need to distinguish between flows and stocks. A flow is, so to say, an annual or continuous benefit, a stream of benefit which comes from a natural resource, and the stock is really the asset remaining. So in the case of fisheries, the flow is the catch, and the stock is the resource, which the fish stock remaining in the sea. And of course, if we have stocks of mineral resources, then the stocks go down. But as I said, they go down in economic terms, but no, in physical terms, but in economic terms, there could be new discoveries to better technology, better processes. So the availability for human use may actually go less down than we had anticipated. Think of the Club of Rome study and forecasts at the time, which proved too alarmist in hindsight. But on the other hand, now I think we have realized that with many resources they were quite right, and we are really massively overutilizing our natural capital stocks. Important is the characteristics of many natural resources in terms of what economists call private, common pool, or public goods. And these differences, and I come back to them, have an implication whether we can easily apply some form of market mechanism to manage these resources, or use the market to manage these resources, or we have to go really more to public policies, regulatory policies, etc. In common pool and public goods resources, the market often does not work well because we have externalities, etc. There are some which call public goods or global goods natural resources, the category of environmental resources or ecosystems. Here I have tried to present this difference in the category of the goods. I should say here, when we talk here of a good, we talk of an entire fish stock, for example. Well, fisheries is actually a good example. If you take the fish when it is caught, so it has been removed from its ecosystem, its environment, then it becomes basically a private good, and its consumption destroys it. So that is the left-hand upper corner, a private good. It's rivalrous, and you can exclude others. Rivalrous means that if I eat a fish, another one cannot eat the same fish, or we have to divide it. But still, in any case, that's the idea. So it's either me or nobody. Now, if we go to we move to the right, the common goods. We talks now of a fish as part of a fish stock. So it's an entire resource. We talk here of the good, and as a stock, it often has this common pool characteristics. If it is not, let's say, a privately owned fishery, or a privately owned lake fishery in Sweden, for example, or where people own private lakes, the stock would be entirely private. But more typical, it is shared among many users, and that is why it becomes a common pool resource. And you all know how difficult it is to get a coordinated use of a common pool resource, especially when you have many participants of users, and the users are somewhat spread along the coast, or they are not a small community, a small group, but that can easily coordinate. So when we have this situation, management becomes extremely complicated, because you have to somehow find an agreement, not only on well, you have to find an agreement how you use the resource, how benefits are shared, etc., etc. I don't want to go now into this discussion further on management, but just to stress the problematic we have here in the case of common pool resources in bringing about sound management, sound use. In the case of club goods, we can the idea is we can easily exclude all those who, so to say, are not part of the club. And in some ways we try to move to some form of club arrangements also for natural resources, so that the user group is more limited and management becomes easier. But when we do that, of course we have to be careful who is excluded. Are we excluding some vulnerable people, and on what basis do we exclude them? You know, so there we have the issue of traditional use, customary use, etc. And I refer to the the World Food Security Committee guidelines on tenure rights to natural resources. There you get a lot of the principles and guidance how you should go about in recognizing traditional customary rights, what consideration you should be taking in sharing benefits, etc. So I highly recommend that you consult this document. If you search in Google VG/tenure guidelines, you will easily find it. Now the fourth category are the public goods. The public goods, they have these characteristics that you can basically not exclude anybody to benefit from it, but they are also not rivalrous. In the sense, when I build up my national defense system, or I look after the air quality, everybody will benefit, and it's not that my use of this good detracts from the use of others, and that's the core. That's the core of a public good, that you cannot easily exclude anybody from using it, but the use itself does not impede the use by others. In this case, of course, you know, in this case, it's almost natural that you create the largest amount of benefit if you have as many users as possible, because it does not reduce the quality. So you want to have it widely shared, but that could be impacting on the way you then have to manage it, because if everybody can use it, who is going to pay for it? And this is where the state comes in normally, and then the state basically charges through taxation of the people. You can have public goods also at let's say a more local level. Say a bridge. You don't want to have a pay toll on any bridge in a small community. So you get the community to contribute, and you produce this bridge with the community tax, and then everybody can use it as he wishes.
On that figure there, presumably if you have a fish stock and you allocate access rights to a limited number of people, that fish stock would stop being common goods and would become club goods. Is that?
Exactly. That is what is exactly. That's the. Now I go to something more practical. In these colors, you get the population density along the African coast, and you see there are strong concentrations along the west coast. It's much lighter populated along the Namibian coast, and again you have a fairly uniform kind of density to most of this part, except there is some area. Kenya, the Kenyan coast, is less densely populated. The average fishery production in different areas, and you see in this area there's almost 3 million tons produced, and the colors, the yellow and reddish, or these colors, yellowish, greenish, they show you the primary productivity, and you see how much higher it is on the west coast of Africa than on the east coast. In the east coast, you have around Somalia. There you have a bit higher productivity in some areas here, but overall the figures are largely different. 3.2 million tons, basically from Angola up, no, from Congo Brazzaville up to Mauritania, and 1.3 million tons down, and then on the west coast, on the east coast, it's 890,000 tons. So the difference is about 5 times this order of magnitude difference in productivity for fisheries. And then there are the graph also shows where are coral reef concentrations. There the islands, of course, are very important here. Then seagrass beds, etc. It just, I think, it's an example how we can depict a good example how we can depict our natural capital or assets together with some flow figures. Now this, I think probably many of you already have seen this graph, which comes from the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment. We already discussed the different categories of ecosystem services, the provisioning, regulating, the cultural, and then how they relate to well-being, human well-being in different strengths, etc. I think the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment report really has done a fantastic job to increase our awareness about the wealth we obtain from our ecosystems, and how they relate in multiple fashions to our well-being. One area which in my work in relation to small-scale fisheries I have found which tends to somewhat be often underestimated or too little recognized are the cultural value of resources. Even in this report, the cultural values, you see, they are very thin lines or so, and I think it has become a bit unfortunate that we now tend to see cultural values related mostly in relation to recreation, which is somewhat a strange concept, because I understand cultural values emanating primarily from a long tradition of the people to use the resources in various fashions, but also for religious, ceremonial purposes, for their identity, etc. And I find that this is, of course, also the most difficult to value, especially if the people who depend on these resources and whose life centers around them are relatively poor people. Because then, if you make kind of the valuation exercises, of course it's from the perspective of people who have low incomes. So you invariably land up with values which, if you put a dollar sign on it, which is relatively low, because it's the value they themselves would give these resources. While if we talk about recreational benefits, of course there could be something joining together in a way, but if we talk of recreational benefits, then it's another income strata often which we talk about. These are people who have time to recreate, so to say, and who have time off from their jobs, and who can afford the cost to travel perhaps by air to. I have just some data I need to take off my glasses. This is an example from Zanzibar. It's again from a study. I think this was a study done by Glenn-Marie Lange from. She now works with the World Bank Environment Department. She has done a lot of valuation studies. You see here the various macroeconomic contributions of a marine ecosystem. In the example of Zanzibar, you have the provisioning services in terms of seaweed farming, how much the GDP contribution is, gross domestic product, or the income generated. Fishing in the provisioning services, fishing is here the most important. But in terms of employment number, seaweed farming, even though the income is low per capita, it creates a lot of employment. And then you have recreation and tourism. And this is almost 5 times higher. It also has a large contribution in foreign exchange earnings. So it adds a lot to the value of the marine ecosystems of Zanzibar. But then there are some other regulating services, fish habitats, waste water assimilation, etc., shore protection, which the value have not been easy to estimate, but they are thought also to be significant. Now, Zanzibar is a good example of an economy that depends a lot on tourism. Well, it's part, of course, of Tanzania, where this sector contributes 24% almost to GDP. A graph which shows the relative values of marine ecosystem services. It's from the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment Report. You have on the left side, left column, you have all the various direct and indirect services, and then you have a relative ranking of different ecosystems. Well, I'm not quite sure how it has been done this, but I think it's based on experts from a wide range of areas of expertise. If you look at cultural and amenity, coral reefs, intertidal estuaries, well, I think what we just can see is that in totality all these ecosystems are in one way or the other very important, and that this kind of presentation, if we use it in our own setting, let's say in our own area or region, can be a very important first step to prioritize perhaps our interventions, our policies, depending on the issues we have. And I think the example from the Benguela current, I guess, was based a bit on such an exercise of relative valuation. So here we don't put a precise dollar value or so, but we just give we give the relative importance. Now this graph and shows the components of the total economic value. I should say that I have not seen many studies which actually arrive at the totality. They usually use some of these values, but to have a total estimate is a challenge. But this is the ideal. This is where what we should aim at, to have a full recognition of the economic value of our ecosystems. There are two basic categories of this value. We have a use value and a non-use value, and the use value is a direct use, like we consume fisheries, we consume fish coming from fish stocks. Then the indirect use, various ecosystem services, which we already talked about. And then the option, some ecosystems, let's say if you think of certain pharmaceutical qualities of coral reefs, marine organisms. There's a lot of potentiality, but which we don't fully understand yet what could be the economic value, but we can presume it is considerable. Then there are the non-use values. The bequest value is really our knowledge of passing on resources to future generations. I think it's a very valid and very important category, because we don't want to pass on. I think many or increasingly people are troubled by the idea of passing on a destroyed world, so to say, where we have destroyed large part of our natural resources. Some people, they derive benefits from the pure knowledge that something exists, and maybe the best, that's always a touchy issue, but the best example may be whales in this category. I think there's a lot or dolphins or some of this. How do you call this? Charismatic species. I was not. Thank you, Kevin. Charismatic species. I think they are most relevant. And altruistic knowledge of use of resources by current generations. I'm not quite sure actually on that category. Okay, now we can. This is I think this is a translation of this categories to a fisheries ecosystem. I don't think we need to really go into this to any great extent, but here, for example, ornamental resources are important. Also, then there is the habitat regulatory, biological regulatory function of ecosystems, etc., etc. I go on and come now to the what are the kind of steps in a valuation process. When we value things, we want to basically see what is the consequence of a change which we bring about, a change in the intensity of use, or we start some new use, etc. So we have some changes to the environment, which then has a consequence on intermediate services like the capacity of the stock for future growth. The change in primary production, and then we have food chain dynamics, etc. Then we have the final services coming out from these intermediate services in terms of commercial fish harvest. We have some regulatory functions of the oceans on greenhouse gases. We have biodiversity conservation as a final service, and we can then evaluate these final services both through market and non-market measures. And I'm coming now to the economic valuation methods proper. There are many studies, reports on these methods in the literature. I have used here a source from UNEP and the World Commission on Meteorological something. Two basic methods are, one is based on what is called revealed preference methods, and the other is based on stated preference, stated by persons. Revealed preference, the preference means it relates to a choice which we make, or individual choices which we make. And the best example to explain a revealed preference method is when you decide on where you would buy or build a house let's say in a town somewhere. You will be taking into account also the natural environmental amenities. Is there some green area? What is the water situation? Is the river polluted or not? Etc. How is the air quality? And all these aspects then lead to a situation where the real estate prices in these areas will be higher than in alternative areas where you don't have these environmental services, or they are much poorer. So air pollution is high, no green areas, etc., etc. So the difference in the price between a real estate price in a degraded and in an undegraded area will give you a kind of an indicator what people are willing to pay for environmental services. So that is the basic concept. So through their behavior, their preferences are revealed, and with the value, the willingness for them to pay for these services is revealed. In the case of recreational use of marine ecosystems, a very important concept is this travel cost approach, which again is an indicator how much people value the ecosystem by their behavior, by their action. They buy, as I said earlier, they buy an air ticket to travel to a place. They buy equipment, diving equipment, etc. They stay in. They pay for their stay in a hotel or whatever, and they may be paying also for the diving classes or those who supply the equipment, etc. All these costs which they incur are then taken as an indicator of how much they value these services. These services meaning nice diving spots, for example, or a nice landscape, a nice forest, whatever. That's the idea of the travel cost approach. And I think I leave it at that. There are some other hedonic prices. They actually, no, this I have already explained. These are the basic principles of revealed preference methods. Now, somewhat more complicated are the stated preference methods. In these kind of methods, we actually ask people directly through questionnaires. And the questionnaires have to be very carefully designed. How much they are basically willing to pay for an environmental service. There are different methods again within this large category, or this category of method. Some are that we ask them to rank or give some preference for certain alternatives, etc. So through these surveys, we can get an idea on the willingness to pay of people of using ecosystem services. And of course, these are services which have no ready market price. This is why we need these valuation methods, because there is no ready price out there to give us an idea on how they are worth, how much they are worth. Because of the complexity and high costs to do these stated preference methods, what is increasingly being done is what people call benefits transfer. You basically try to use the results from another survey and you to some form of assumptions on what and what not you can, and what adjustments you have to take to transfer the results from one situation to another. You arrive at this valuation estimate. This is an example of was just an example again of where you which evaluation method you apply when, but I think we already covered this. Now this is a table which I think is quite interesting, just to give an idea on the incredible magnitude of losses we may be incurring when we lose very important ecosystems like coral reefs. This estimate is from Caribbean coral reefs. It's an estimate of annual losses in 2040 and 2060. I don't know all the details how they did it, but what you can see is that the losses are in the order of billions of dollars, which we are incurring. Interesting here is that some of the highest losses are associated to pharmaceutical uses. This is what I have mentioned earlier. It's uses which we actually we hardly do currently, but which are predicted to be very, very relevant within the next 30 years or next 50 years. Now, here I have just put down the classical bioeconomic model of a fishery. I understand that Kevin and I think he presented the biological shape of this curve already. The relationship between so the relationship between a fishing effort, which is the intensity of fishing shown here, and here the yield curve. That we have initially a rapid increase in yield, and then it flattens off, and eventually it drops, and we may even have a collapse of stocks. Then it would just fall down at a very high level of fishing effort. This line here shows the fishing cost. So it's in this graph, it's a straight proportional increase in fishing costs as effort expands, and the maximum economic yield is reached at where this curve is the tangent to the yield curve. So that's that point, and here you have the maximum resource rent, so to say, that this fishery can produce. It's a bit lower than at the maximum physical yield, but what I wanted to show here is what is the basis for the estimating the economic value of a fishery is in fact this difference between total revenues and total costs. So that's the net benefit we get from a fishery. What we need to understand also is that if there is no management in the fishery, then the rent usually will be dissipated completely, because people or investors will continue to expand fishing effort until that point. The reason is that when we talk of costs in economics, we talk about opportunity costs. What is the value of the same resource use in the next best opportunity? So this graph actually includes the cost to capital and a return on capital in its next best use. So it already shows, this cost curve already shows the normal return to the fishing industry. And for that reason, when you are this at the MEY level of fishing effort, a fishery would be extremely profitable, because you would get your normal return on capital plus the resource rent. So that's the driving force which pushes fisheries to further expand, because you have what we call surplus profits. You have additional profits over and above the average profit in the economy. And only this situation is only stopping at that point when the fishery is already overexploited and where the risk of collapse can already be quite high. Of course, it's a single species model. This here, it has certain abstractions from reality, but as the principles, I think, apply and have applied, and we see this all around the world. When a fishery is here, so when basically there's no surplus profit anymore, sometimes it may, in a bad year, it may even become a loss-making enterprise. Then the industry will come out and shout that they need subsidies. And we are so stupid, we as governments, to usually give subsidies, and then the cost curve will move down here. So the meeting point of the curves is even further to the right, and fishing effort increases even furthermore. So a mistaken subsidy policy for fishing gear, engines, fuel, etc., can further erode the value of our fishery to the economy. Just wanted to give you this basic relationships. And I don't want to explain a lot on this graph, but you see here it shows the productivity in the world marine fishing fleet dropping by a factor of 3. This is how capacity has developed, and this is the catch per unit of capacity. It's an index capacity because it includes also technological progress, and so as you can see, it has over the last 40 years it has dropped about 5 times or something in this order of magnitude, and due to that the world economy is well, and the country's economies are incurring huge losses, which in a study, the Sunken Billions study, which some of you may have heard about, it's a World Bank FAO publication, we have estimated the potential resource rent loss annual resource rent loss in the order of $50 billion globally, and we have made an estimate what the world economy lost over the last since 1979 until 2008, and the figure is a staggering $2.2 trillion of loss. So these are the kind of consequences you have of poor management of a critical natural resource, not only from an economic angle, but also from an angle of food security and nutrition security. And unfortunately, we have growing incidences of overfishing in Africa, dramatic losses in catches. I just heard about the Nile perch fishery in Lake Victoria is massively declining. There are massive losses, economic losses, and it creates a lot of hardship to the people, and of course to the consumers at large, because and that is where things go beyond merely economic values. The nutritional value of fish is extremely high. It can really, a small quantity of fish can turn an insufficient diet to a complete diet. And we know it's the micronutrients, the proteins, etc., are fundamental, and especially in this region. I have shown this graph with the resource rent earlier to now say how you estimate the value of the asset. So we have the resource rent is the annual stream of benefits, but the value of the fish stock as a natural capital or as an asset is then the summation of all future benefits, a stream of benefits, net benefits into the future. And you do this, I don't want to go into the details, you do this you could simply aggregate an infinite stream. But that would mean that we give the same value to what we get in 50 years to what we get tomorrow. And that would not be quite adequate, because there are so many uncertainties. We generally things we have today we consider more valuable than those we have in a year's time, etc. And for that reason we need to discount the stream of net benefits to make them, so to say, we have to aggregate the value for what is today's value. We have to discount this stream. Now you do this with the discount factor. It is like an interest rate. It's so to say the reverse of an interest rate. If you put $100 into an account, you get 3% interest. Then next year it will be 103 worth. So 103 are today worth 100. So in this case, you would be, the discount factor would be 3%. The question, however, is then, how much should we discount that? That is again a bit a political issue, because in discounting we also discount, so to say, the benefits which future generations get from this resource. It's not us who are living in 50 years' time, it's the next generation. We have to make a choice as society which takes into account the requirements, the preferences also of future generations. So some form of a compromise interest rate could be or discount rate between a purely economistic rate, which would basically treat our fishery like any other investment, any other capital stock. Think of the returns that have been made by in the financial world. So you could say we want to have a return on our natural capital which is equal that what we get from Stanley's or Morgan Stanley's or so. So then we would apply a very high discount rate, 10–20%. The implication then would be that our fishery would produce less output, because we maintain a very high capital stock in the sea. So we maintain a very high level of our fish stocks and reduce, so to say, our current consumption. If on the other hand we well, maybe I'm now contradicting myself a bit, because if we have a very high capital stock in the sea, then that should also be good for future generations, because the stock is very, very secure and safe. Well, we can discuss this maybe after the break. I think I have something on accounting, but I think that's yet another area. Maybe we have first a break and then we come back for a roundup. Okay. Well, let me show this this graph, but I already hinted at the interrelationship between prices, values, and distribution. The pattern of income and wealth distribution will have an impact on the structure of the consumption, on the kind of products we consume, and this then, of course, has a relationship to the structure of production. There is, of course, an interrelationship, because we try to produce what consumers demand, and the value we give to certain ecosystem services is influenced by the way income is distributed. That's important to keep in mind when we do valuation, and also important, of course, in the design of our surveys, because your demand structure will change depending on in which income on wealth category you are. Okay, moving forward, I think it's just in a way a summary of my presentation, that we need an improved understanding of the consequences of human actions on natural resources and ecosystems and their ability to provide goods and services, expand our efforts, and we need to assess the impacts on human welfare of changes in natural resources and ecosystems, and then link that better understanding to everyday decision making. And I think we need to be, as I mentioned, we need to be strategic in the way we approach valuation exercises. We need to increase our understanding and need to ensure that our increased understanding then also it actually enters the policy making, decision making processes. I think that requires that we need to think of participatory valuation exercises, that the people who are involved in valuation are then also involved in the decision-making processes in some hierarchical structure or nested structure up to the top policy level. Well, and if we fail to do that, I think our decisions will continue to be wrong, and we are continuing to incur high economic, not only economic costs, but also social and cultural costs. So we have all a great task to continue or to start ahead of us.
Yes, I need a